Hey guys, tonight we plunge into the murky, foamy and frankly nauseating world of medieval laundry. You're about to explore a time where the smell of fresh linens was a distant fantasy, and washing clothes could feel more like punishment than purification. You step outside your little timber-framed cottage in the early morning chill. Your backache is already, and you haven't even reached the wash tubs yet. The linen shift you slept in, your only real layer beneath your outer dress, is stained with sweat, dirt, and whatever that mysterious blotch from yesterday's stew might be. You're lucky if you own more than 2 shifts, and even luckier if they're still mostly white. Spoiler, they're not. The fabric clings damply to your skin, and you try not to think about the fact that it's also home to a bustling community of uninvited guests. Lice. Fleas. The ites. Tiny travellers making the rounds through the armpits and waistlines of every outfit you own. Welcome to your wardrobe where everything is itchy. Everything smells, and dry cleaning hasn't even been invented in your dreams. You fold up your laundry bundle, tied in a rough sack, and head toward the common wash area, likely a riverbank or a communal trough, depending on your village's setup. As you walk, your nose twitches at the mingled scents of manure, wood smoke, and fermented laundry water from yesterday's wash. It's like you did disaster, with notes of barnyard and despair. There's a strange comfort in this routine, though. As revolting as it all sounds, there's rhythm here, certain stains, certain smells, a certain kind of exhaustion that every woman in town knows intimately. You're part of a cycle older than soap itself. Every stain tells a story, some from dinner, some from childbirth, and others from moments you'd rather forget. And these clothes aren't just dirty, they're practically historical records. That hem torn during the harvest festival dance, still fraying. The ink blot on your sleeve from that one time you tried to write your name. Faded, but proud. And of course, the mysterious greenish splatter you've never been able to identify, still haunting the bottom of your skirt like a spectral stain. Laundry here isn't just a chore, it's survival. Dirt doesn't just inconvenience you, it invites infection. Wearing clean clothes might make the difference between healing and festering. But here's the kicker: clean, in medieval terms, doesn't mean spotless or sterile. It means not actively growing mushrooms. At this point, you're probably thinking you'd never make it through a week in this medieval mess. You're not wrong. You probably wouldn't survive this. But remember, nobody thought of it as disgusting back then. It was just life. It was warm hands in cold water, gossip with neighbours, the hiss of linens drying on thatch. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in these comments, where are you listening from tonight? And what time is it for you? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You lower your bundle by the riverside, the fabric already damp from morning dew. The stream murmurs beside you like it's trying to apologize in advance. Your fingers tremble slightly as they reach into the sack, pulling out one sopping underdress after another. Most of the pieces are made from homespun linen, rough, beige, and stiff from repeated wear. There's no detergent, no softener, no bleach. You don't even have a proper washboard. What you do have is a nearby rock, some elbow grease, and the dim hope that this time, the stains won't win. You kneel on the pebbled shore, your skirts bunched under your knees. The icy water rushes over your hands, biting your skin and waking you faster than any cup of coffee ever could. You dip the shift, twist it, slap it on the stone. Repeatedly. Lie. You're settling an old score. It's not just your clothes, either. You glance to your left, your neighbour Eggins is dunking what looks like a set of baby swaddles. To your right, young Matilda is scrubbing a mystery stain out of her husband's hose, muttering curses that would make a monk blush. It's communal chaos, and somehow it all works. Kind of. Here's a mainstream fact. Most people in medieval Europe only wash their outer clothes a few times a year. Undergarments. Slightly more often, but still nowhere near modern standards. The goal wasn't spotless, it was tolerable. And honestly, by medieval no standards, tolerable might shock you today. Historians still argue whether the average peasant was truly filthy by modern definitions, or simply adapted to their sensory surroundings. After all, when everyone smells like a mix of wet dog and week-old stew, maybe you stop noticing. You become nose blind in the name of sanity. And if you're wondering where the weird enters this already weird picture, brace yourself. We'll soon get into what people soak their laundry in, and let's just say, rivers were the least of your problems. But for now, you wring out your tunic, shaking the icy drops from your fingertips. 1 down. 15 to go. Hope you brought snacks. You stare at the tub in front of you, but it's not filled with water from the stream. No, this one has been seasoned. It's a sloshing brew of liquid gold pale, acrid, unmistakable. Human urine. You'd probably flinch in your modern bathtub at the thought. But here, in your medieval laundry routine, urine is treasure. Welcome to the warm and pungent world of lant, the term for stale pee that's been allowed to ferment for days in wooden buckets tucked behind homes, outhouses and stables. It's not a prank. It's chemistry. Because the truth is, urine contains ammonia, powerful alkali agent, and alkali breaks down grease. That means this medieval miracle fluid could lift body oil, food smears, and even tough, wool processing residue better than plain water ever could. It's basically your go-to degreaser. If you can get past the smell, you reach into the piss pot, gagging slightly, but trying to look like you've done this 1,000 times. Because you have. You dip the yellowed underdress into the tub, making sure it's fully soaked. The fabric grows heavier, darker, wetter with each moment. You lift it, dripping, and begin the ritual. Twist, beat, dip again. And here's a real kicker. You're not doing this behind closed doors. This is public laundry day. The urine soak method isn't scandalous, it's expected. The pot sits proudly in the middle of the shared wash yard, giving off a bouquet of chemical warfare and regret. Nearby, a child pokes a toe at the side of the bucket. His mother smacks his hand away, warning him not to waste the good stuff. Yes, good stuff. Some wealthier households even bought urine from the poorer townsfolk. Fresh or fermented, this was a high-demand product. Historians still argue whether this technique was more prevalent in urban or rural areas. In cities like London or Paris, where chamber pots emptied out of upper windows and into the streets, the supply chain was robust. In smaller towns, families stored their own, often in containers cheerfully labelled or covered to keep the neighbourhood dog from having a midnight set. A fringe tidbit for your dreams tonight: fulling mills, where raw wool was cleaned and softened, also used giant tubs of urine to treat fabric before dyeing. That means some workers spent hours stomping fabric in warm urine with their bare feet. Imagine that footspur. You hoist the now urine-rich linen over a shoulder, your arm trembling from the weight and the sheer internal conflict. It's clean by medieval standards, but it reeks like betrayal. You try not to breathe too deeply as you shuffle over to the rinse bucket, a blessed vat of cold stream water, mercifully free of ammonia. The rinse feels like redemption. You dip, swirl, and wring. The air around you clears, just slightly, and for a moment, you forget how many other layers you still have to go. And it's not just women out here, though they're doing the bulk of it. In wealthier homes, laundresses are hired solely for this pungent purpose. But even they know the value of a good bucket of pee. Some go door to door collecting from inns and taverns. Others simply set up a trade, 1 clean rag for 2 pots of your best fermented morning offerings. You'd think this would be the worst part. But oh no, this is just the chemical pre-wash. Next up, sheer physical assault. As you lift the cleaner, though not quite fresh-smelling, tunic from the final rinse and drape it over your arm, a gust of wind sends the hem flapping into your face. You cough. It still smells like someone's bad decisions after too much ale. You look around and realise you're not alone in this moment of quiet disgust. Matilda is retching softly by her own tub. Ehines is humming, for herself, probably to drown out the olfactory assault. You're all in this together, bonded by cloth, sweat, and an alchemical process that truly separates the strong from the squeamish. A light joke emerges from the far end of the washing yard. You can always tell whose clothes have been soaked right. Their skin smells like they were born in a brewery. Everyone chuckles. A moment of levity. Then back to the wringing, twisting, slapping. The cycle continues. Some towns experimented with additives: wood ash, lime, even soapwort, a flowering plant with natural suds properties. But for most common folk, pee was the most reliable tool. It was free, plentiful, and let's face it, you were going to make it anyway. As the wind picks up, you take the washed item and sling it over a nearby hedge, hoping it'll dry before the next rain. Or the next dog comes trotting by. You wipe your hands on your apron and reach for the next bundle. It's stained with something brown. You hope it's mud. Your arms are already sore, and you barely scratch the surface of your dirty bundle. The next item is heavier, a coarse linen apron stained with what looks like oil, dirt, and possibly tears from last Thursday's pie disaster. No amount of soaking in fermented urine is going to fully dislodge this mess, which means it's time to beat it into submission. You shuffle over to the riverside rocks, a favourite spot for what some might optimistically call mechanical agitation. There's no scrub board, no gentle setting, just a chunk of stone and centuries of pent-up frustration. You take the apron, fold it twice, and slam it against the flat rock. The sound is dull, wet, satisfying, like slapping pudding with a grudge. You do it again. And again. You pause only to shift position, then keep going until your shoulders protest and your elbows threaten to file a complaint with the medieval laundry union. This is what passes for deep cleaning. Beating clothes wasn't just catharsis, it was necessary. Without effective soaps or machines, physical force was the only way to dislodge ground in dirt and body oils. You're not fluffing a pillow, you're waging a one-woman war against medieval grime. And let's not romanticize it. It's messy. Splashback hits your cheeks. The apron's corner flings a droplet of rinse water directly into your eye. You try not to think about what kind of bacteria just made a new home near your cornea. Medieval immune systems were not optional. Nearby, another woman lifts a tunic above her head and slams it so hard against the rock, a flock of birds takes off from the trees. "Take that, you stew-stained demon," she huffs. Her neighbours nod approvingly. Everyone here has a personal vendetta against their laundry. Here's a mainstream historical fact for your mental linen chest. Women across medieval Europe were known to wash by beating clothes on rocks, wooden boards, or even with wooden paddles known as battledores. These flat tools, some carved, some plain, were used to smack garments until they gave up their filth. In Iceland, some women even used frozen rivers for winter washing. They'd punch holes in the ice and hammer out laundry beneath the surface. Laundry is both a chore and a near-death experience. Historians still argue whether beating clothes actually extended or shortened their lifespan. Sure, it got them clean-ish, but many garments shredded or frayed from overzealous pounding. You couldn't just pop into a shop for a replacement tunic. Cloth was valuable. Every tear hurt like a betrayal. Now back to your rock. You grip a pair of Hosethic wool, full of mystery-stained sand, begin a fresh assault. The splash this time is impressive. A bit lands on your shoe. Medieval shoes went waterproof. You curse under your breath, but it comes out more like a sigh. This is just Tuesday. A fringe tidbit for the curious. Some medieval communities held group laundry days, where women gathered at designated river spots, not just to clean clothes, but to swap gossip, pass judgment, and form alliances. Laundry became a kind of political theatre. If someone's garments were especially stained, it wasn't just a cleaning challenge, it was a social clue. You pause to stretch your back. The sun is higher now, drying some of the damp rocks, and your blouse sticks to your ribs from the effort. Your hands are red, raw, your fingers pruning and chilled. A splash of icy water lands on your shin as a nearby washerwoman slaps a doublet with spectacular force. Trying to wake the dead. "Elaine?" Someone shouts. "No." Elaine grunts. Trying to remove Henry's beer vomit. Ah yes, domestic bliss, medieval style. You bend again, pick up the corner of the apron, and examine it. The stain has faded. Not gone, but faded. You count that as a win. You dunk it back in the river for a final rinse, the water swirling brown for a moment, then clearing. Almost poetic. Almost. And as you wring it out one final time, twisting the thick cloth with all the strength your tired arms can muster, you realize there's a strange rhythm to it all. Beat, rinse, wring. Breathe. Repeat. It's not glamorous, but it's essential. Nobody else is going to do it for you. Unless you're lucky enough to be noble, which, spoiler alert, came with its own questionable laundry practices. Well, get there. For now, you toss the apron over a nearby hedge, next to your still dripping shift. The drying process has begun. Your fingers are numb. Your lower back is plotting revenge. And your nose. well, let's just say it's given up entirely. But there's satisfaction here too. You've reclaimed this garment from the brink. Tomorrow, when you wear it, you'll remember the slap of rock against fabric, the sting of cold water, and the silent nods of approval from the other women. Laundry is your battlefield. And today, you won. You pause for a moment, watching the soaked garments drip from their places on hedges, rocks, and that one broken cart someone dragged in ages ago. The use as a makeshift clothes line. The air smells less offensive now, diluted by sun, breeze, and maybe just your nose surrendering to olfactory exhaustion. But don't get too comfortable, because now comes the fun part, the soap. You reach into your cleaning bucket and pull out the laundry agent of choice, not a bar of Dove or a bottle of lavender-scented anything, but a lump of pasty goo made from wood ash and animal fat. Welcome to Medieval Lies soap. It's greyish, gritty, and smells like a pork chop that spent 3 days by the fire, then fell into a mud puddle. But how it works? Kind of. You scoop out a glop with your fingers and smear it over the stained hem of a smock. It immediately leaves a greasy residue, which you then rub vigorously into the fabric, hoping the lye component does its chemical thing. The word soap feels generous here. It's more like a weaponized meat smear. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Actual soap did exist in the Middle Ages, but it was crude and expensive. Most people, especially peasants, resorted to lye-based mixtures made at home using ashes from the hearth and rendered fat from kitchen scraps or slaughtered animals. If it could dissolve skin oil and didn't cause immediate rashes, it was good enough. But it wasn't safe, not always. The lye in these homemade brews was highly alkaline, and prolonged exposure could burn your skin or eyes. If your fingers felt tingly after scrubbing, that wasn't the warmth of accomplishment. That was the saponification process eating away at your top layer of epidermis. Still, you slather the fabric with this gritty goo, scrubbing harder now, letting it settle into the weave of the cloth like an unwanted lotion. Your hands are red and chapped already, but you keep going. Clean is a relative term, and in medieval laundry, clean means only slightly dangerous. Historians still argue whether medieval lye soap was originally used more for clothes or for human skin. Some texts imply it began as a laundry agent and was later repurposed for body hygiene. Others suggest the reverse. Either way, the stuff was everywhere, and its effectiveness depended heavily on who made it. Some villages prided themselves on their soaps and others, not so much. You wince as the soap seeps into a shallow cut on your knuckle. It stings like betrayal, but the apron looks a little brighter now. You rinse it again in the stream, watching swirls of grease and ash float away in lazy spirals. A fringe tidbit for tonight's mental spice rack: in some areas, people added herbs or flower petals to their soap mixture to improve the smell. Lavender, rosemary, and even marigold. Unfortunately, the lard aroma usually won. You might get a whiff of thyme, but it was thyme wrapped in bacon that's been stepped on. You look up from your scrubbing, and sure enough, someone across the stream is holding up their fancy soap, a chunk flecked with what might be chamomile. The other women oh and ah sarcastically, and she does a playful curtsy. Soap envy is real, especially when the alternative is scrubbing with sand or moss. Don't ask. Want a sniff? She calls, waving the grey clump like it's a holy relic. You wave her off. You've already inhaled enough pork-scented ash to season dinner. And lest we forget, soap in the Middle Ages wasn't always homemade. In parts of southern Europe, especially around Castile in Spain and Marseille in France, hard soap from olive oil started making an appearance in the later Middle Ages. This stuff was luxurious, imported, and very expensive. Nobility might have it. You'd be lucky to touch it once in your life, probably while laundering someone else's knickers. You give the tunic one final rinse, squeezing water down your arms and into your lap. You glance at your leg stamp, speckled with ash and foam, and sigh. You'll need a wash yourself by the end of this, but baths are rare, and hot water rare still. So you mentally file that wish away with someday, and return to your work. You reach for a second rag, one that's been used as a head wrap. The sweat stains are baked in like emotional scars. You don't even bother with the soap on this one, just a prayer and a few solid slaps against the rock. Some stains weren't meant to leave. They're practically family at this point. Nearby, a woman mutters that her soap is getting too soft. Should have added more ash, she grumbles, stirring her bucket with a stick like a witch cursing a particularly greasy curse. You smile. because despite the filth, the fatigue, and the smell, there's a strange solidarity here. Everyone is battling the same mud, the same meat-fat stains, the same suspicious yellow patches that definitely weren't butter. And when someone finally invents lemon-scented detergent, they better put your name on the bottle. By now, your hands are raw, your knees ache from crutching, and the lower half of your dress feels permanently damp. But there's no stopping yet. The laundry won't dry itself, and even if it did, the drying process in the Middle Ages brings its own brand of chaos and discomfort. Time to trudge deeper into the mire. Let's talk about where you hang your freshly cleaned clothes. There are no clotheslines strung between white picket fences here. No tidy plastic pegs in bright colours. In fact, there are no pegs. Just your imagination, your surroundings, and a healthy disregard for hygiene standards. You drape your still dripping tunic over the nearest available surface, a low stone wall that just happens to border the graveyard. Yes, the graveyard. Drying clothes on tombstones and churchyard fences was not uncommon. Stone surfaces absorbed sunlight, stayed warm longer, and most importantly were available. You either weathered slab beneath your tunic and whisper a quick thank you to whoever lies beneath. If they're annoyed, they haven't said anything yet. A little further off, someone else is using the thatched roof of a pigsty to dry her linens. The straw soaks up the water slowly, and the height keeps dogs from stealing garments to use as chew toys. It's a win-win except for the lingering aroma of pig. Here's a mainstream historical fact to chew on. In many medieval villages, communal drying areas didn't exist, so people improvised. Thatched roofs, hedgerows, garden fences, even the branches of leafless trees became makeshift drying racks. If the sun was out and it wasn't raining, anything horizontal was fair game. Historians still argue whether these practices were tolerated by the church, especially when it came to drying over sacred ground. Some records hint that priests objected to garments flapping over consecrated headstones. Others suggest it was so common no one blinked twice. One monk even complained that drying petticoats kept blocking the path to the crypt. Honestly, relatable. You shuffle toward the fence near the garden plot. It's mostly sturdy, though the rightmost post leans like it's had a few too many ales. You drape a camis across it and smooth the folds with your palm. The breeze catches it almost tenderly, giving it a gentle shake like the fabric is sighing in relief after its chemical baptism. Not everyone's so lucky. Your neighbour Eggins is chasing down a pair of hose that the wind carried across the lane. She curses under her breath, one slipper flying off as she runs. That's the third time this week. She bellows. I swear they're trying to escape me. You chuckle softly and press your remaining wet items onto the grass. It's not ideal, but it's soft, flat, and relatively clean, emphasis on relatively. You pick a patch that's mostly free of animal droppings and ignore the worm wiggling away from your elbow. A fringe tibbet to whisper into your dreams. In some wealthier households, linen presses were used to help dry and flatten garments after washing. These giant screw-operated machines applied pressure to damp fabric, leaving them smoother and quicker to finish drying. But that luxury's far away from your village, and even further from your aching arms. The wind picks up again, rustling your drying smock like a ghost stretching its arms. You weigh it down with a rock, just in case. The sun's doing its best to peek through the clouds, casting the faintest hint of warmth onto the drying graveyard collection. You squint up, thankful for the light. But don't forget, this drying process is no guarantee. Rain could strike at any moment, turning your drying linens back into a soggy, mildewed mess. Or worse, some cheeky kid might decide to borrow a cloth for their next mud battle. Clothes don't just dry, they must survive. You glance around to make a mental map, shift on the fence, apron on the stone, hose on the hedge, chemis on the branch. You mutter their placements like a prayer, lest you forget one and leave it for the crows. Don't let the pigs get that one, Ellen calls, pointing to your drying rag. Too late, you mutter as a curious snout appears from this stay's corner. You shoo it away with your shoe, scolding the pig like a disobedient child. It grunts and trots off, unbothered, probably off to find someone else's better-smelling tunic. Despite the chaos, the smells, and the constant threat of wind or wildlife, there's something oddly serene about this drying ritual. You step back and look at the garments flapping gently in the wind, forming a strange little patchwork sky. Stained, soaked, maybe even cursed, but still standing. The sun slips behind a cloud again, casting a greyish light over the scene. You wrap your shawl tighter and hope it holds off long enough to finish drying your last pair of hose. They've suffered enough. And just when you think you're done, you spot something in the grass. A sock. Yours. Covered in mud and looking like it just lost a bar fight. You sigh. Back to the piss bucket it goes. You don't notice it at first, but as the laundry dries and your muscles start to relax, the air shifts not just in temperature, but in tone. The chatter rises and changes pitch, laughter bubbles from one corner of the yard, and you find yourself caught in the quiet lull of one of the oldest rituals in the village, laundry gossip. This isn't just stain removal, it's social glue. Laundry day, despite the stink and slog, is also the only time half the women in town get to huddle together without a man hovering nearby or a child tugging on their apron. It's a stage, a confessional, a therapy circle that smells faintly of urine and goat. You perch on an overturned bucket near the hedge, watching the misted horizon while wringing your sleeves. Around you, stories drift like wood smoke. Who snuck into whose cottage after curfew? Who's suddenly wearing nicer veils than she can afford? Who's expecting a child before the wedding feast has even been planned? Gossip here is a kind of power, soft, barbed, and rarely incorrect. And nothing fuels it more reliably than dirty laundry. Literally. A bloodstain here, a tear in these, wrong place there, or a suspicious lace trim on what should be a plain chemise. Every mark tells a story, and the women will read it. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Throughout medieval Europe, laundry work was often the only time women gathered outside the home without male supervision. These communal routines allowed them to bond, exchange news, and maintain a subtle social hierarchy. Who washed what and how was as much a signal as what was worn. Historians still argue whether laundry gossip functioned as a tool for female resistance or was simply an extension of domestic control. Some scholars believe that laundry spaces allowed women to challenge church and social authority through whispered critiques. Others argue these conversations often upheld traditional roles and reinforced class distinctions. The truth likely lies somewhere between soap suds and slander. You lean forward as Ellen lowers her voice. Saw more boiling water yesterday. A lot of water. Oh, someone prompts, feigning innocence. And 3 clean towels on her line today. You know what that means. Around the wash yard, there's a chorus of oohs, giggles, and one exaggerated gasp. Someone fans themselves with a petticoat. You roll your eyes, but smile. Boiling linens usually meant one of 3 things. Someone was sick, someone had a baby, or someone didn't want a baby anymore. Either way, it was news, and laundry was the first to know. A fringe tidbit to tuck into your pillowcase tonight. In some regions, midwives and wise women were known to read laundry like omens. Blood on rags, discoloration, or even the scent of cloth might be used to diagnose illness or predict outcomes. Medieval diagnostics, not entirely accurate, but always enthusiastic. You reach for your shawl, now dry and only mildly scratchy. As you drape it over your shoulders, you catch Aggins giving you a look. You've been quiet, she says. Everything all right at home? You nod, but she sees past it. She always does. You're thinking of your eldest, out working in the next village, or maybe your husband's aching joints and the winter ahead. But you smile and shrug. Just tired, you say. The women nod in unison, as if they all feel that same tiredness deep in the bones, under the fingernails, soaked into every stitch of fabric they wash. The laundry never ends. Neither does the worry. But for now, there's companionship. You take comfort in the knowing glances, the shared groans about soap rashes and missing socks, the sarcastic jokes about husbands who couldn't scrub a stain if their lives depended on it. Matilda pipes up. Mine tried to help with the washing once. Ruined 2 smocks and boiled a chicken in the rinse water. Everyone howls. Even you chuckle, picturing the poor bird floating sadly among suds and stockings. You kept the chicken? Someone asks between wheezes. Of course, Matilda shrugs. Best laundry soup I've ever had. You shake your head and rub your temples, the kind of laugh, headache that only comes from sudden joy on a difficult day. Your hands still sting, your back still aches, and your clothes still aren't entirely clean. But for a brief hour, none of it matters. This isn't just the soap smelling, stain-scrubbing misery it sounds like. This is your community. This is the place where secrets are rinsed out gently, friendships are hung out to dry, and jokes terrible, beautiful jokes get passed down like recipes. You stand to stretch, glancing at the sky. The clouds are holding, for now. With any luck, your underdress will be dry before the sun dips too low. One of the younger girls brings over a cloth and offers to help you fold. You nod gratefully. "Let's start with the shift," you say, before it decides to run off like the last one. She grins, folding beside you, quietly absorbing everything. Laundry day may be gross. It may be exhausting. But it's also a living memory passed from hand to hand, and some stories only live if you listen while you work. You try not to scratch. Truly, you do. But it's useless. Your newly cleaned shift clings to your back like a slightly damp promise of regret, and with it comes the unmistakable itch. That crawling, stinging, don't you dare think about it kind of itch. You dig your nails gently beneath the neckline and wince. They're still there. Because here's the cold, squirming truth: laundry doesn't kill lice, or mites, or the mysterious red bump that's been lurking behind your left knee for a fortnight. All that scrubbing, soaking, and river beating, great for dirt, useless for vermin. You shift uncomfortably on your stool, trying to rub your thigh against your calf without looking obvious. Around you, other women are doing the same, scratching discreetly, slapping arms, blowing hair out of their faces as if that'll dislodge anything with legs. No one speaks about it directly, but everyone knows. Even the clean clothes are basically just slightly less infested. Here's your mainstream historical fact to make your skin crawl just a little more: lice and fleas were rampant in medieval Europe, and laundry alone wasn't enough to eliminate them. Boiling water could help, but boiling was a luxury. Most garments were made of wool or linen, which shrank or scorched if heated too much. So the bugs stayed, moved in, built condominiums in your cuffs. You glance down at your drying chemise. The linen is stiff now, and a shadow near the hem catches your eye. Is it a stain? No, just a flattened flea. You flick it off with a practiced motion and say nothing. Historians still argue whether the frequent scratching depicted in medieval manuscripts was symbolic of suffering or just extremely accurate. One theory suggests monks who illustrated such images were battling their own infestation while drawing. Honestly, based on your current itch index, that theory checks out. A fringe tidbit for your nightmares tonight: medieval physicians believed lice could be caused by excessive heat in the body, or as punishment for immoral thoughts. So if your underthings are crawling, maybe it's not the soap, it's your sins. You scratch again, harder this time, and glance around guiltily. Matilda sees you and raises an eyebrow. Neckline. You nod. Moved in last week. I think they brought cousins. She sighs, reaching into her apron and pulling out a small wooden confine, toothed, worn at the edges. Want it? Is it? Boiled yesterday. Don't flatter yourself. You take it gratefully, turning slightly away as you drag the comb through your scalp. It's satisfying in a gross, masochistic way. You don't want to know what's falling out behind you, so you keep your eyes forward and pretend you're chasing dandruff. That's the polite fiction. Nearby, Eggins is boiling water over a fire pit. She is lucky enough to have the big iron cauldron this week. A few of the more heavily infested items, mid linens, baby wraps, are dunked in and stirred like an unpleasant stew. Steam rises, carrying a bouquet of wet cloth and singed wool. The heat might kill a few mites. Or 8. You remember the old folk remedy, hanging under things in the smokehouse to suffocate the pests. Another involved sprinkling ashes into your sleeves, or cedar shavings in your bonnet. You tried that once and sneezed for a week. Some of the older women mutter prayers while folding laundry. Not for divine laundry assistance, just in hopes that today will be itch-free. Even the saints have limits. A joke floats through the air. Why did the bishop never marry? Because he couldn't stand his wife's fleas. Groans and laughter follow. You laugh too, but not too hard. Your shift is starting to tighten again. You comb faster. You fold your drying hose, careful to shake them out first. A suspicious speck tumbles free and vanishes into the grass. You whisper a silent wish that it doesn't climb back on your foot. And here's the cruel irony. All this effort to stay clean, to look presentable, to not stink like someone's foot stew, none of it guarantees comfort. Laundry isn't just work. It's a truce with the filth. A fragile, temporary ceasefire. You sit back, run the comb one last time through your hair, and sigh. Maybe tonight, you'll sprinkle a few mint leaves under your pillow, or rosemary, or whatever herb they say confuses lice. You doubt it'll work, but it's something to believe in. And you have to believe in something, because tomorrow you're going to put on these clothes again, bugs and all, and smile, and scrub, and repeat. Because in the Middle Ages, itching is just part of being alive. The breeze has settled, and the last of your clothes flap lazily on the fence, stiff with drying lye and sun. You take a moment to rest, palms pressed against your lower back, eyes squinting toward the horizon. The hardest part of laundry might be done, but the judgment, that's just getting started. Because in this world, laundry isn't just laundry, it's a performance. A reflection of your virtue, your skill, your station in life. If your husband walks into church with stained sleeves or a dingy collar, people talk. If your children's shifts look more brown than beige, it's not just dirt, it's a moral failing. You sigh, turning to retrieve your husband's tunic from the drying rack. It's slightly faded, patched in 2 places, and the hem curls a little too much. You smooth it with your hand, trying to coax it back into shape. It smells not awful. That's about the best you can hope for. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In medieval society, a woman's skill in maintaining her household, particularly the appearance of its laundry, was tied directly to her reputation as a wife and mother. Clean linens didn't just reflect good hygiene. They reflected obedience, virtue, diligence. In some places, a husband's status was literally linked to the brightness of his cuffs. Historians still argue whether this emphasis on cleanliness in appearance over actual sanitation contributed to later beauty and fashion norms. Some scholars believe the roots of modern clean moral thinking began here, in the boiling pots and piss buckets of women who had no time for nuance. If it looked clean, it was clean. The period. You lay out the tunic and inspect the sleeves again. There's still a faint shadow of what might be wine or plum juice, as your husband insists, a heroic bruise from falling off a wagon. You mutter under your breath and tuck that side inward. No one needs to see it. A young girl walks by, hair tied back in a ribbon too fine for her station. Her linen kerchief is dazzling white, suspiciously white. The Airhins notices too. Someone's been borrowing the mistress' soap, she whispers. The girl catches the comment and stiffens. You both pretend not to see, because this is also a game of subtle warfare. Whose linens are brighter? Whose garments dry fastest? Whose lye soap has fewer scorch marks? Women compare, criticize, and compete even if they swear they're not. A fringe tibbet to fold into your night. Some regions instituted laundry inspections before religious festivals or weddings, where a woman's family was judged by the appearance of their linens. Brides were expected to present a degree of meticulously washed bedding, proof that they could run a clean, God-fearing home. Dirt wasn't just dirt. It was a warning sign. You glance at your own degree chest back home. 2 pillowcases, 3 shifts, 1 barely serviceable tablecloth. You remember scrubbing them until your hands bled the week before your wedding. Your husband never noticed, but his mother did. She sniffed every fold. You lift your son's hose off the fence. The patch at the heel has held, but the toes are thin. You'll need to darn them before winter. Another task on the never-ending list. Still, you smile. He always manages to wear holes in both socks in exactly the same spot. It's practically a talent. Behind you, someone curses. A pair of drawers has blown into the stream. Day runs after them, skirts bunched up, arms waving like a scarecrow in distress. That was my husband's clean pair. His only pair, Eggins adds helpfully. Laughter ripples again. You laugh too, but it catches in your throat when you spot the old woman at the edge of the garden. She is folding a linen shroud, simple, white, no adornment. Funeral cloth. Yours might be next. You look away. Too soon, you think. Too soon for shrouds and silence. Instead, you focus on the now. You fold your husband's tunic, smoothing every wrinkle. You press your palm flat against the worn crest on the sleeve. The laundry might not be perfect, but it's yours. It tells your story. It holds your labour, your worries, your little triumphs, and clean hem at a time. You gather the rest of the dried clothes and start stacking them in your basket. The shift with the patched armpit. The apron that still smells faintly of onion. The socks that might need one more rinse, but will have to do. You'll touch them all again. Tomorrow. And the next day. And the next. Because in this world, cleanliness isn't just next to godliness, it's next to respectability. And your family's honour is hanging by a clothesline. The church bell rings faintly in the distance, and you instinctively glance up. It's nearly midday. Your basket is half full, your fingers are prunny, and your knees feel like they've aged 20 years in one morning. But you still have one more load to finish your husband's woolen robe. It's heavy. Zdaup. Smells like it lost a fight with a seller and decided never to recover. You drag it from the rinse tub and drop it onto the nearest flat surface with a soggy thumb. The splash reaches your ankles. You sigh. This garment isn't just thick, it's a trap. Wool in the Middle Ages is everywhere, and for good reason. It's warm, durable, and endlessly available, especially in places like England and Flanders. But it's also a beast to clean. One wrong move, and it'll shrink down to toddler size or stiffen into something resembling roof tile. You start the gentle pressing motion, never rubbing, never wringing. Just soft, repeated squeezes along the sleeves, as if coaxing the water out with whispered apologies. Because if you overdo it, you'll turn this robe into felt. Unwearable, itchy felt. And your husband will complain. Loudly. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Wool was the most commonly worn material across Europe during the medieval period, especially among the working and middle classes. But washing it was a cautious art. Fuller specialist workers sometimes handled raw wool, but everyday garments still needed laundering at home. Carefully. Painfully. Historians still argue whether most households washed wool garments as often as linen underclothes. Some claim outer layers were brushed and spot cleaned instead, to avoid damaging the fibre. Others suggest frequent light washes, especially among rural women who couldn't afford dedicated best robes for every occasion. You lift one sleeve and give it a sniff. Not awful, a whim. You fold it gently and set it over the log to drip dry, pausing every few moments to check that it hasn't sagged into the dirt. Wool is stubborn. It takes forever to dry and gets heavier by the minute. Haynes notices your careful manoeuvring. Still trying not to felt that thing? Still trying not to get blamed if I do? You mutter. She grins. At least you don't have to scrub a monk's habit. You raise an eyebrow. Oh, she nods toward the convent on the hill. Their rules say no bathing and no speaking, but they wear those robes every single day. Trust me, silence smells worse than sin. You laugh despite yourself. Because yes, monks had their own laundry rituals, or lack thereof. And that brings us to a fringe tidbit. Monastic clothing was notoriously difficult to clean, not just because of the sheer amount of fabric, but because of rules. Monks and nuns had codes of silence, restrictions on bodily indulgence, and occasionally even bans on removing garments except for ritual washing, which meant some robes went weeks, months without proper laundering. A novice might be assigned to the laundry quarters as penance, scrubbing in silence while contemplating the sins of both the robe and its wearer. But even then, access to firewood for boiling or soap ingredients might be limited. Cleanliness was spiritual, but physical sanitation didn't always keep up. You reach for another woolen item, this one a shawl that smells faintly of sheep and old garlic. You try to ignore it. Wool holds onto odours like secrets. You press it carefully, laying it flat along a sun-warmed fence post. The sun's trying its best today. That helps. At least a little. Do you think it ever gets easier? Matilda asks from beside you. She is folding a wool tunic with all the reverence of a priest handling relics. What? Laundry? You ask. No. Everything. You don't answer right away. You think about the aches, the stains, the lice, the endless whispering behind drying sheets. You think about the wool robe you've washed 15 times in 4 months. You think about the shift you wore through childbirth and then wore again to market the next day. You shrug. Maybe not, but we get faster. She nods. It's the kind of silence that feels mutual. The kind shared by women who've both lost children and found patience in the rinse water. You look at the wool again, draped like tired flags on a battlefield. One good gust of wind could undo the whole morning's work. But they're clean. Or close enough. And that's something. Because here's the truth. In a world without conveniences, laundry is proof of care. You might not control much plague, famine, feudal taxes, but you can keep your family's robes from crusting over. You can soften sleeves. You can rinse away last week's blood, or stew, or wine, and give someone a fresh start. Even if it's only until next laundry day. The sun is dipping lower now, casting golden streaks across the wrinkled, fabrics fluttering like tired sails around the village. You take a long breath and stretch your spine, which has begun to stiffen like starched linen. The bulk of your laundry is drying, and for a moment, you feel the quiet satisfaction of a day nearly conquered. But then a small voice interrupts that calm. "Where's my robe?" a boy asks. A very serious boy, wrapped in an expression far too solemn for his 6 years. You look down at him, and then at the tiny stack of drying garments nearby. And then, you remember, a monk's robe. Not yours, not your family's, but assigned to you. Because you owe the abbey 2 days' labour this season, and this week's penance, scrubbing for the silent ones. You sigh and reach into the final bundle, a coarse brown habit, heavier than a guilt-laden conscience and twice as scratchy. You can smell it before you even unfold it. And not in a pleasant hayloft in spring kind of way. More like crypt meets cabbage. You try not to gag. Here's your mainstream. Historical fact, monks' robes were almost always made of undid wool, coarse and functional. Their design reflected humility and utility, but rarely comfort. These robes were worn for days, sometimes weeks, and even slept in. Baths were rare, and sweat was constant. Over time, the robes soaked up not only bodily grime, but also the spiritual burdens of their wearers. You lay the robe out near the wash trough, glancing at the sun. There's time barely. You begin with a basic rinse, swirling it through the greyish water that has already cleaned 4 tunics and a pair of hose. It doesn't help much. The water immediately turns darker, and a cloud of something releases into the air. You squint and hold your breath. Historians still argue whether monks were truly forbidden from washing frequently, or whether they simply chose not to in the name of piety. Some orders, like the Benedictines, did have rules about hygiene, but also caveats. Bathing was acceptable during illness, or in extreme weather. Of course, extreme was open to interpretation. You begin scrubbing the hem with a handful of lye paste. The grease in the mixture collides with the monk robe funk, forming a smell that could stun a goat. You gag once, recover, and double the scrubbing. A fringe tidbit: in many monasteries, robes were passed down. When a monk died, his habit might be cleaned maybe and handed to a novice. This meant some robes had generations of use. Some were stitched and restitched, with patches older than the wearer. A threadbare family tree, worn close to the skin. You flip the robe and begin on the back. It's soaked, heavy, and sags as you work. Your arms tremble. You stop to rest, and the robe slumps to the ground like a very disappointed parent. Baines passes by and mutters, "God's work never smells like roses." You smile weakly, then lift the robe again and give it a final dunk. The rinse water swirls like storm clouds. You squeeze out what you can carefully, so as not to shrink this wool, and lug it over to a flat stone for drying. You arrange it with reverence, letting the sleeves splay out like open arms. You mutter a quick apology to the stone beneath it, just in case it doesn't appreciate the burden. And then you sit. You deserve this moment. The robe is done. Not fresh but improved. Enough, perhaps, to avoid divine disappointment. You glance up at the abbey, looming gently on the hill. Inside, a group of monks chant the early evensong, voices drifting on the breeze. It's beautiful. Ethereal. A perfect soundtrack for drying garments that smell like penance. As the chant rises, you rest your chin on your knees. Your hands are blistered. Your dress is damp. But the worst of it is behind you. And there's something oddly peaceful about cleaning a garment that has prayed more than you ever will. The robe, now laid out like a flag of surrender, catches the last rays of sunlight. You stare at it, the weight of the day sinking into your shoulders. You've cleaned for the poor. You've cleaned for your children. You've cleaned for yourself. And now, for God. Just another Tuesday. The monk's robe lies still, steam rising faintly from its thick folds as the sunlight kisses its damp surface. You stretch your arms and look toward the communal green, where a few villagers are already packing up their baskets. You, however, have one final task before heading home. It's festival week. And that means everyone is expected to show up wearing their cleanest clothes. Not new. Not tailored. Just the ones with the fewest suspicious spots and the least offensive odor. So, now you turn to the real challenge, the family's holiday garb. You unfold your husband's best tunic. It's dyed a dull blue worn at the collar, patched on the elbow, and embroidered with a cross-stitch that was fashionable 10 years ago. Beside it lies your only festive overdress, once burgundy, now best described as dried plum. You run your hand over the embroidery. It's faded, but still there. Holiday laundry isn't about achieving sparkle, it's about illusion. You want these clothes to look fresher than they are, cleaner than they feel, and most importantly, respectable enough for dancing near the fire pit without someone whispering, "Did you see her hemline?" Here's your mainstream historical fact. Medieval holiday clothes were typically everyday garments spruced up for special occasions. Most peasants couldn't afford separate Sunday best, so they spot-cleaned, mended, and occasionally decorated their existing wardrobe. The pre-festival laundry day was frantic and ritualistic, a scrub, a stitch, silent prayer. You start with the tunic. A mustard stain stares at you defiantly. You pour a bit of cold water over it, rub it with a paste of ashes and lye, and use your fingernail to scrape at the dried edge. It fades barely. You sigh. Historians still argue whether festival dress codes in small villages were enforced socially or religiously. Some records suggest clergy encouraged cleanliness to honor the Lord during feast days. Others claim it was more about neighborly pride. Either way, dirty clothes on festival day drew attention, and not the good kind. You shift to your overdress. The neckline is singed from last winter's hearth accident. You'll fold it down. Hide the scorch. Pretend it's a new fashion. A fringe tidbit for your curiosity. In some towns, laundry before major feasts was considered a spiritual act. Women chanted prayers while washing, sprinkled holy water into rinsed tubs, or left garments overnight under the moon for blessing. One German folktale claimed moonlight helped lift wickedness from the cloth. You glance up. The sun is dropping, but the moon's curve is already showing. You can't decide if that's a blessing or a warning. From across the green, Eggins holds up a petticoat to inspect it. Festival worthy, she calls. You squint. If it's too dark to see the stains, it's good enough. She laughs, folding it with exaggerated flair. Then in the cleanest woman in town by candlelight. You smile, returning to your task. The final piece is your daughter's shift. It's impossibly small, wasn't it just last year that it fit her? You soak it, then scrub a berry stain with a sprig of mint from the herb patch. Not because it works, Gus, because it smells better. As you work, the other women pack up slowly. Baskets creak under the weight of half-dry linens, and footsteps shuffle toward cottage doors. You're still crouched by the stream, rubbing at a stain that refuses to budge. Your fingers have turned pale and puffy. The mint-scented water drips through the weave of the cloth like a final goodbye. You hold the shift up to the light. Is it clean? Is it good enough? Yeah. And sometimes that's all you get. You spread the dress and tunic across the last warm stones, arranging them like garments for a play. Tomorrow, no one will see the patched elbow or the berry smudged hem. They'll see dancers, hear music, smell meat roasting on the spit. They'll clap, laugh, and pretend everyone's world is clean and sweet-smelling. But you'll know. You'll know what it took. Because behind every festival twirl is a week of stink, scrubbing, and sacrificial soap. Holiday cheer starts in the piss bucket. Your knees creak as you rise, wiping damp palms on your apron. The festive clothes are drying barely. The stream gurgles quietly behind you, and the village falls into that hushed moment just before the rush to prepare supper. But your work isn't done. Not quite. You glance at the smaller bundle beside your basket, one you've avoided until now. Rags, linens, towels, the childbirth cloths. These are the most intimate, the most stained, and the most feared. They carry a gravity that no amount of scrubbing can lighten. Because these weren't used for stew spills or muddy boots. These saw blood, fear, prayers. These were witnesses. You kneel again, opening the bundle slowly, reverently. The first rag is stiff, brittle at the edges. The second, soaked in a faded brownish red that tells you the birth was hard. Or perhaps not survived. You don't ask. You just wash. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Childbirth in the Middle Ages was both sacred and perilous, attended by midwives and surrounded by layers of ritual and practicality. Linen rags were essential not just to manage blood and fluids, but as tools of protection, warmth, even luck. Women prepared birthing cloths weeks ahead, sometimes embroidered with crosses or stitched prayers. You drop the first rag into a pot of hot water boiled over a fire that's burned low all day. You stir it with a wooden spoon like soup, careful not to let it scorch. The cloth unfurls like a limp flower, and the water turns pinkish grey. Historians still argue whether these linens were washed for reuse or buried. Some regions, especially among wealthier families, disposed of birth cloths, ceremonially believing them spiritually spent. But for commoners, linen was too precious. Everything was washed. Everything was reused. You lift the cloth with tongs and wring it out carefully. The fibres feel fragile, like they might give way with one wrong tug. You lay it flat on the grass, letting the earth drink up whatever it must. A fringe tidbit whispered across centuries, in some parts of Eastern Europe, midwives saved a small corner of the birth cloth to bury near the threshold as protection against evil spirits. Others tucked fragments into amulets. Even stained, even torn, these rags held power. The second cloth is worse. Thicker. Heavier. You hesitate. Ains appears at your side. No words, just her hand, taking the rag and lowering it into the second pot. She begins scrubbing. You work beside her, silent. This isn't gossip time. This is something else. First child, she says quietly. You nod. You don't know the girl's name. Just that she screamed until her voice broke. The cloths grow lighter. Not white, never white again, but paler. The worst of the blood leaves. What's left is memory. You set them out to dry on low stones, away from the others. Not hidden, but all part. And here's the thing. No one will thank you. Not the girl. Not her mother. Maybe not even the midwife. But they'll wear clean shifts next time. They'll swaddle the baby in a cloth that doesn't reek of old fear. And you'll move on to the next task. Because you always do. Matilda appears with a final bundle, more cloths, more towels. You raise an eyebrow. Twins, she says. Didn't know until the second started crying. You both chuckle, weakly. It's the only laugh the situation allows. You rinse the last rag and pin it under a flat rock, watching the water drip out slowly, as if reluctant to leave. Childbirth cloths are the hardest part of the laundry. Not because of the stains, but because you know what they meant. What they witnessed. What they almost couldn't hold. And yet, you clean them anyway. Because someone must. Your hands shake a little now. Not from cold, but from sheer exhaustion. The sky is sliding into a softer shade of blue, hinting at the dusk to come. The last of the childbirth cloths rests on the stones, drying in solemn silence. You let out a long breath, but there's still one final pile waiting. The woolens. Not the robe from earlier, those were the men's. These are yours, and your daughter's. And unlike linens, wool behaves like a toddler on a sugar rush, unpredictable, difficult and likely to shrink if you so much as look at it the wrong way. You pull out your everyday shawl. It's scratchy, the weave loose in places and still smells vaguely like last winter's stew. The edges are damp not from washing but from morning dew it absorbed while being accidentally dropped on the grass. There ge. You pick it up and start your ritual, a gentle flick, a shake, and then careful brushing. You don't wash wool the same way as linen. At least, not if you ever want it to fit again. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Wool was central to medieval clothing across all classes. While nobles had fine dyed varieties, Peasants wore rough spun wool that wasn't always fully processed, often still containing natural oils. This made it water-resistant, but it also meant it held onto others and grime with ferocity. You grab your daughter's little woolen hood next. It's red, or at least it was. Now, it looks like a rose left out in the rain. You hold it to your face, inhaling the faint scent of last month's firewood and something vaguely sour. No lice. Thank God. Or not yet. Historians still argue whether peasants truly understood the science behind wool shrinking, or if it was all trial and error. One school suggests they learned from disaster-shrunken tunics passed down to children, comically tight hose tossed in the hearth. Others claim regional knowledge was passed along orally. Wash it too hot and you'll be making clothes for saints. A fringe tidbit for your bedtime musing. In some remote parts of Scotland, woolen garments were never washed at all. Instead, they were hung in thick peat smoke for days, which masked the odour and purified them spiritually, if not physically. You glance at your own woolen overdress, folded neatly in your basket. You haven't dared to wash it properly in over a month. You spot cleaned the armpits with vinegar water, patted the hem with mint leaves and left it in the smokehouse for 2 nights. It still smells. Earthy, but not alarming. A Haines comes up behind you with her husband's woolen hood. Still smells like the mill, she mutters, giving it a sniff and recoiling. Or maybe just regret. You both laugh. Softly. Because its true wool traps more than heat. It traps everything. And you wear it anyway, because the alternative is frostbite. You lay your shawl flat across a low wooden rail, reshaping the corners like a baker flattening dough. If you leave it wrinkled, it'll dry that way, stiff as bark. And even though it's ugly and heavy, it's yours. You wore it the day you gave birth. You wore it to your sister's funeral. You wore it dancing once, in the spring, when the cider had gone straight to your head and someone played the lute until sunrise. You smooth the fibres one last time, then fold your daughter's hood and tuck it gently beside it. The air is growing colder. The wool will take longer to dry. But tomorrow, when she wears it to church, she'll look warm, cared for, presentable. Even if it smells a bit like goat. Because that's the truth no one admits. Cleanliness is relative. And wool never really forgets. The breeze picks up again as the sun slips behind the trees, scattering golden light across the drying garments like a last blessing. You stand, brush off your apron, and look around the washyard. Everything you laid out is still here miraculously. No pigs have stolen your shift, no rogue wind has carried away a sock, and no child has decided to repurpose your headscarf as a kite. A quiet victory. But then, you see it off to the side, nestled under a hedge like it's hiding in shame, a royal undergarment. Not yours, of course. This belongs to the manor house up the hill. You recognize the fine stitching, the delicate lace edging, and the faint lingering scent of something imported. You squint. Is that jasmine? You pick it up carefully, half out of curiosity, half from instinct. It's soft, unlike anything you've ever worn. Thin linen, almost see-through, and yet, even the wealthy sweat. You hold it up to the light and catch sight of a distinct smudge. Definitely not dirt from the field. No, this is something more personal. A stain that proves even queens fart. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Even among the nobility, underwear was not washed as frequently as modern sensibilities might expect. While outer garments were often brushed and maintained by entire teams of laundresses and valets, undergarments, especially shifts and chemists, saw less attention. And despite access to better soaps and imported cleaning agents, personal linens could go weeks between washes. You carry the delicate garment to a nearby bucket and stare down at your reflection in the grey water. There's no special technique here, just your regular process, now applied to nobility. You grin to yourself. They might live in stone towers and eat from silver plates, but their underthings still need you to scrub them. Historians still argue whether noblewomen were truly unaware of how their clothes were cleaned, or whether they simply pretended not to know. Some correspondence from the 15th century shows highborn ladies sending detailed instructions to laundresses right down to how folds should be dried. Others suggest that servants were expected to simply make it disappear, filth and all. You dunk the royal shift gently, treating it more like a relic than a rag. The lace edge flutters in the water like a jellyfish. You whisper an apology to the jasmine perfume as the scent fades beneath the lie. The fringe tidbit for your thoughts: in some royal courts, used underwear was burned rather than laundered, especially if illness or suspicion of witchcraft was involved. Cleanliness, in those cases, wasn't about hygiene, it was about control, secrecy and ritual. You lift the garment and pat it dry on a fresh cloth, careful not to wrinkle the embroidery. You won't hang this one on a fence. It doesn't belong in the graveyard with your tunics or beside the pigsty with your shawl. You lay it across your lap and fold it like it's made of clouds. Matilda peers over your shoulder. "Fancy," she says. "The sea." You mutter. "And smudged." She smirks. "Even royal bums sit the same as ours." You both laugh until your ribs ache, the kind of laugh that only comes after a long day of dirty work and shared absurdity. You walk the folded undergarment up the hill to the manor's servant entrance, knock once and hand it over without ceremony. The maid who answers barely looks at you, but you catch her eye, just long enough to see it. Exhaustion. "Matching yours." "Thanks," she mutters and disappears. And that's that. The royal shift will return to silken skirts and velvet cloaks. No one will remember who cleaned it except you. You, and the faint scent of jasmine on your hands. As you return to the yard, you realize something else. The divide between noble and peasant might be measured in fabric and embroidery, but when it comes to laundry, everyone's got stains. The final garments hang like ghosts in the cooling dusk, their edges fluttering gently, whispering a chorus of quiet fatigue. You run your hand over the fence post, feeling the rough wood against your aching palm. Everything is washed. Not perfect. Not pristine. But washed. And that's enough. You load your basket slowly, folding each piece with practiced care. Every cloth tells a story. The apron with the old soup burn. The chemist patched with red thread because white had run out. The once festive overdress now softened by time. You stack them like pages in a book you wrote with your hands, and just when you think you're done, you see the old cloth tucked under a rock, forgotten, damp, streaked with ash. You pick it up. It's one of your oldest rags, used for everything from washing spills to wrapping herbs. It's fraying at the edges, nearly translucent in places. You hold it for a moment, wondering if it's finally time to throw it away. But you don't. Because in this world, nothing is wasted. Not sweat. Not lie. Not even a rag on its last breath. You fold it gently and tuck it into your basket, not because it'll be useful, but because it was. That counts. Here's your final mainstream historical fact. Medieval laundry rarely included the luxury of discarding garments. Cloth was labor-intensive to make, expensive to purchase, and mending was a daily necessity. Most families held on to clothing for years, decades even, until it was reduced to thread and dust. Then it became stuffing, or bandages, or rags for these next generation. Historians still argue whether this intense frugality was born of poverty or reverence. Did they keep garments alive out of necessity, or because each piece, each fibre, carried the weight of lived memory? You step back and look at the drying yard one last time. Shadows lengthen. A breeze carries the lingering scent of soap and sun-warmed wool. Ains waves goodbye with her elbow, basket already balanced on her hip. Matilda trudges behind her, grumbling about a missing sock. You smile. Because here, surrounded by beaten tunics and half-dry hose, you've uncovered something most people miss. This is sacred work. This is life made visible, made touchable. It's all the things no one wants to talk about: the blood, the sweat, the ache in your shoulders. And yet, here you are, holding it in your hands. A fringe tidbit, just for you. In some parts of early medieval Ireland, washwomen were blessed by local priests before large community cleansings, not because of superstition, but because their work was seen as vital to the spiritual well-being of the village. They believed clean garments could bring peace to the soul. You bend down, lift your full basket, and press it against your stomach. It's warm from the drying cloth. Heavy, but familiar. You walk home slowly, heels dragging just slightly. The cottages glow with firelight now. A dog barks. Somewhere, someone sings a lullaby out of tune. The cloth against your hip shifts with every step, whispering a rhythm you know too well. Truck. thought, and repeat, because tomorrow it starts again. The night has settled, soft and deep, wrapping your world in a blanket of gentle silence. The last echoes of the stream have faded, the final garments are folded, and your fingers have stopped trembling, finally still after a day lived between stone and water, ash and cloth. You return home, step over the threshold, and set your basket down by the hearth. The quiet inside is different, not empty, but earned. Feel the warmth of the fire kissing your cheeks, the subtle weight of exhaustion settling over your shoulders like a wool shawl. There's peace in the ache. There's calm in the weariness. You glance at the drying line near the wallown last cloth, swaying ever so slightly. You smile. The work is never truly done, but tonight it can rest. And so can you. In the darkness, you sit. Maybe you close your eyes. Maybe you listen to the soft hum of the world continuing on without you, like a lullaby sung in a language only the bones understand. The air smells of wood smoke, damp wool, and something else is something clean in its own right. Not perfume, not jasmine, but a truth washed with care, wrung with patience, and laid gently to dry. Let that scent carry you now. Let your breath slow. Let your mind soften. There's nothing left to scrub, nothing left to fold. Not tonight. Sleep now. You've done enough.